My guest on this podcast is Denzel Jones, a 23-year-old that sourced £18 million property in just 5 years. We talk about his journey, but more importantly, we break down his processes into 7 steps that you can copy the same format. Let's jump straight into the podcast. Denzel, I'm so pleased to have you here on the podcast today. We're speaking at your event a few weeks ago, absolutely phenomenal Gen Z event, having 500 young people in the room. I was blown away with what you guys are doing. And property sourcing is your thing. That's what you've been doing, and other business you're involved in as well. And you've got a real nice framework. I want to really just get straight into and unpack the deal stacking framework, 7 steps. First of all, tell me when it comes to kind of finding deals and stuff, what's important?
Yes, I think when it comes to finding deals, it's actually about understanding what is a deal. I feel like a lot of people go on Rightmove and Zoopla and find a property and think it's a deal.
Yeah.
But a property alone is not a deal. It's if it actually matches a criteria, it stacks up, it works within the frameworks which the investor wants. Mm-hmm. And that's what I consider a good property deal.
So in terms of getting started, talk us through what do you think the steps are?
Yeah, so I think before anyone gets started in any business, whether it's property sourcing, whether it's Amazon, it's all about the mindset. I feel like there's a lot of, fluff online, which is talking about, get rich quick and stuff. We got to understand that it's a long-term game.
Yeah.
And the reason that I like to pick property, because it's a place where you can play long-term games with long-term people. So mindset is so important. That's why actually we started the Gen Z Club, because we want to provide an environment where we have people around us who are actually like-minded. And now I'm very aware that many people don't actually grow up in these environments. So it's about surrounding yourself with these environments, whether it's through reading the books, audios, attending networking events, and just really immersing yourself as a high achiever. You got to think, what will your future self be doing right now? What time will they be waking up? What will they be watching? I think that's all which is very, very important when it comes to starting your journey. Because again, when it comes to property and business, it's not easy, right? And if you have that mindset of everything coming quickly, you're not really going to work on yourself. When things go wrong, you will crumble. And that's why I think it's very important to, first of all, before we start and go into any steps, is just to know that it's a long-term game and to have the mindset in place before you get started. And
when we think about the mindset, and I just as you were sharing that, I was thinking about my life when younger days, let's say I spent some time with people that probably weren't the best people to be spending time with. Some of those people are probably locked up for life right now. So not some of the best people to be, and where I was kind of going off to in my life was probably not the best place either.
Yeah.
And it's only when I changed my environment and the people around me that I started thinking differently. And some of that was forced on me. And my dad said to me, you're not spending time with old people, right? And then ended up creating different friends and different environments. So the environment is so important.
100%.
But sometimes, how do we know that we need to change? How can we recognize that we have to do something? We got to take the responsibility. No one's going to give it to us.
Yeah, really good question. So I think it's all about the conversations that you're having. I think similar to you, the people I was initially surrounding myself with, the conversations weren't really something that's insightful or forward thinking. It was just thinking about things which are all negative. And I think a lot of people necessarily have the ego where they want to be the richest in the room, the smartest in the room. But I'm the opposite. I want to make sure that I'm in a room where I'm always learning. So for example, even till today, I'm always putting myself in masterminds where companies are doing tens of millions. So I know that I'm the lowest earner relative to everyone else because I can learn so much from them. So I think it's about, and you don't have to necessarily, do something crazy to be in these rooms. It's just about understanding, okay, cool, where would my future self be? And the one thing that I used to do is go to hotel lobbies in Mayfair, literally sit there, eavesdrop on conversations. I might buy a water. And then I've actually got quite a few clients from just literally hotel lobbies. So just literally thinking, what areas will they be in? Because it's not easy, right? The friends that you grew up with, and I think people will say stuff on the way like, oh, you've changed, but end of the day, what you're doing this for is bigger than just a conversation about who's got an argument with who's trying to fight who. Just always think forward to the future.
And it's easy for us to feel these are the only, this environment that I'm in. If it's not serving you, that these are my friends, what I'm going to do without them, I'm going to be on my own. But the reality is, depending on where you are age-wise, when I look at my age, every kind of 10 years, when I look at the environment that people I'm with, it's completely different.
Yeah.
It's evolved, it changes. So in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years from now, some of the people who are holding you back, you may not even remember their names.
Exactly.
So we want to make the decision to take responsibility for ourselves.
100%.
So let's talk about the deal stacking framework then that you use for finding or sourcing deals and kind of starting that journey. What's the first step there?
Perfect. So I think the first step is actually understanding that you want to get into property and understanding what it entails. Now, there's so many different business models to get involved with, but you understand that property is a really secure asset that will be here forever. So knowing why you want to get into property is so important and what it takes. So that's always the first step, getting clear on the goal and committing to it long term. Because again, as I said earlier, people want to say do property today, then trading tomorrow, then Amazon the next day. But I think if you have that forward vision thinking, that's like, okay, cool, look, I can have property as my main business and build multiple streams through that. That is the first step to knowing, okay, cool, this is a business that I can actually go forward with.
Yes. As I think as entrepreneurs, we can find it really hard to stick to one thing. You know, we find 50 business ideas every day.
Yeah.
This is a business, we could do this, we could do that. And it's really hard to just stay focused on one thing. And I really struggled with that myself, jumping around. And even within property, there's so many different strategies, techniques that we can use to make money. Which is the right one? How do we find someone? You do it for 5 minutes and then you jump to something else and you think, oh no, that one feels like it's going to make more money. And sticking to that one thing is hard. But it's important to say, when you create a plan of what you're trying to do and you just stay focused on it, this is the thing.
Yeah.
And you stick to that and be disciplined about that.
Yeah, and I think it's because as well the internet, they get multiple sources of income confused. They think it means having multiple different industries. But like yourself, who I've been watching for a long time, you might have started off with one strategy. And for example, let's say you excel in that strategy, you can now outsource that to your team.
Yes.
And then you can now build out another strategy within that strategy and so on. So for example, with myself, I started off with sourcing, then I built up my rent-to-rent business, then started purchasing, then built up my luxury high-end businesses and so on. But it's still multiple sources of income, but within the same business and the same
they're related, they support each other.
Yeah, and they're all intellectual, creating yourself an ecosystem. So it's about working with the end in mind. So that's something that's very important.
Yeah. And I started with sourcing, by the way, as well. And I had no money. So it's a case of get good at finding opportunities and then finding people who want to buy those opportunities. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth. And I think that's the best skill. It doesn't matter what you want to do in property. I think that's really where you should be starting. So
yeah, because you have to find deals, right?
Yeah.
No matter if you're doing rent to rent, HMOs, you need to know how to find good deals.
Yeah.
So if you can spot them from now, you can build your power team, you can build your knowledge bases around that, then everything will come into fruition together.
Cool. So what's step 2 then? Let's move on to step 2.
Perfect. So step 2 is becoming a specialist. Now, I'm very big on known as the go-to sourcer for a specific strategy in a specific area. Now, a lot of people tend to be like, I'm going to source a deal in Southampton, in Birmingham, in Manchester. And what's going to happen is you're not going to become a specialist, right? And actually in life, people pay for specialists.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a really good example. So when I was sourcing one of my first deals in Nottingham, we had a property that was literally around 3 streets away from each other. But because I didn't know the areas too well, I just assumed that it would have the same nightly rate as an Airbnb, not knowing that there were 3 completely different streets. One was known as like a very high crime area,
Right.
and other was a bit closer to the station, and it was only 3 streets, but still, it was actually a very nice street. And now having a property on the other street actually negatively impacted the nightly rate of the property. So that's why I always recommend to become a specialist, because when you know the area inside out, you'll now know, okay, cool, what area I should do and what nightly rate I should get to, or if it's a HMO, what could the rooms go with? So really learn the area inside out. And within that, it's also building your network around that, because again, there's so much research you can do online about the different areas of property, but there's nothing beats real life data. And I recommend the power of 5. Know at least 5 handymen in the area, at least 5 sources in the area, at least 5 agents in the area, at least 5 other investors in the area, and 5 developers in the area. And the reason being, because that's your point of contact. Now, when you're sourcing different strategies as you become more experienced, you can now tap into that network to actually understand what is a good deal and what isn't a good deal. So the second step is really understand my area and what strategy within that area. Because again, it's all good saying you're a Birmingham property sourcer, but again, you might now be sourcing lease options and HMOs and buy-to-lets. And I'm not saying if something comes, in front of you, you can't pass it on to someone. But I think being known as a go-to person can really help you, I guess, get that credibility. And then once you source regular deals, you can now diversify and be like, okay, cool, look, right now I'm doing rent-to-rents. I've mastered that. I've got someone that's helping with the rent-to-rent side. Now let me move on to buy-to-let. So specialist is so key.
Yeah, I'm kind of smiling as you're sharing that, because I'm thinking about, again, my journey when I started, and I started sourcing property, and then I transitioned into started partnering with other people. So rather than just selling deals on, it was a case of, can you put the money in and we'll do the work together? I'll get the work done, we'll share the profit. And so from a branding and positioning point of view, and what I was known for was joint ventures in property in Birmingham for a long time, probably at least 10 years. And just as you're sharing that, it really got me thinking, it's so important to do that in a conscious way from the beginning. You've heard the phrase, your network is your net worth, and you'll also hear it in this particular podcast as well. That's because people in property recognize the importance of being connected with other people. Property is a people business, and that's the reason I've been running a networking event for over a decade now. Each and every month, we bring like-minded people together, an opportunity for you to come along and meet some of those people, and also learn from other people on the stage, learn from myself as well. So make sure you book onto the next meeting. We're on the third Tuesday of every month in Birmingham. Now let's get back to the podcast. So let's go back a little bit in terms of how did you get started in property? What was your journey?
Yeah, so with my journey, again, since what I mentioned, I knew that whatever business I'll get into, my end goal will be property. So I always thought, let me start with the end in mind. So
why property though? What made you think property is going to be key in my future?
I think because I noticed trends. I noticed that footballers that I'm aware of, or rappers that I'm aware of, or businessmen in general, they all end up with property. They all want to build that generational wealth through real estate. So I thought, obviously football didn't work out. So I thought, okay, cool, let me just start a business that even, because I always think long term, I feel like even if I fail for 5 years, by the time because at the time I was about 17, by the time I'm 23, 25, I'll somewhat be good in property just due to long-term consistency. So that's how I got started. Then I thought, who can actually learn from us actually doing it? Because this is the thing, you can try by yourself and that's always good, but it can take you a lot longer than learning from someone who's actually done it before. And luckily enough, I actually came across a mentor who's someone that's been in the industry for 20 plus years at the time, is around 60 years old. And he kind of took me under his wing. And again, a lot of people say to me, Denzel, I've got no money. How can I get a mentor? And as he got to be someone of value, I feel like the issue is people, come across people who are doing well, asking to take.
Yes.
But how can you be of value? So I said to him, look, I want to do your social media, help you with your branding, do tea and coffee at your office when you have your meetings. And I'll just learn as much as possible from you. So now he wasn't feeling like it's something I'm just taking from him. He actually saw me as a valuable person in his team. So he'll now bring me to networking events, and he really invested in me because and he wasn't actually a mentor. Like he didn't have like a program or something. Yeah. He just more so mentored me because he saw potential in me.
He shared his knowledge.
He shared his knowledge
with you.
Yeah. Exactly that. And from that's how I really, gained information. And to be fair, funny thing is, I would always come to him saying, I want to learn about property. Where he said, no, Denzel, for the first 6 months, it's all about the mindset. I used to think to him, like, what is this? I didn't come here for this. But until I think 1 or 2 years later, I completely understood why he did that, because
the Karate Kid moment.
Yeah, it's the Karate Kid moment, 100%. Because you can have, and this is the thing in the world, right? Everyone has skills. Everyone can be sales. You're doing selling when you're telling to convince your mum to take you to the shops. That's selling, right? But not everyone has the right vehicle and the right mindset to actually take it and to monetize it. So he really taught me how you can take that mindset, think long term, and apply it to your business. So he started taking me to events, bringing him deals, and then I went to start my own sourcing company.
It's really inspiring that you took the time to find somebody, but how you can add value. And myself, many people I know that do well in property, you get lots of requests for people saying, can I shadow you? Can I come and learn from you? Can I just sit quietly in your office? And it's, as you said, it's that take mentality, but they may not perceive it as take, but actually it is a take. And when you flip it around, you think, how can I give value? How can I be of service? And everybody can benefit somehow from somebody, right?
Yeah.
And we all got certain skills, strengths, and things we're good at. And how can we utilize those to help somebody else? You're much more likely to find a door is going to open your way.
100%, 100%. It's all about relationships. Property is a people's game, so all about relationships.
Yeah, one of the first books I really got into was How to Win Friends and Influence
Amazing
People.
book. Yeah,
that really helped me understand that I need to be thinking about others rather than myself when networking.
And it's the compound effect, right? And this is one thing that I've always realized in life, is that some of the connections that you make today, and even to like with the Gen Z Club, some of the connections I made 3, 4, 5 years ago, at that point, it wasn't as valuable to me, right? But I still, offered them value somewhat. Now, as it comes to 3, 4 years' time, a lot of them have now become a lot valuable to me just due to the compound effect. So that's back to the mindset, always thinking long term. Don't just think how can you benefit from it today.
Yes,
because you never know how it can benefit for you in the future.
Yeah, because your attitude could have been, this person is of no benefit to me right now, I'm not interested.
Exactly.
Whereas you're saying, well, actually, we just know each other, and at some point in the future, if something happens, fantastic. If it doesn't, it's absolutely fine.
100%.
So let's jump to step 3 then.
Perfect. So step 3 is actually to find investors and to understand their criteria. Now, there's a lot of debates online about, do you find your deals or investors first? But I always say a deal isn't a deal unless you have a criteria. Because what happens is a lot of people, they'll get a deal from an agent or a landlord and have no investor, and then they'll now ruin that relationship. So it's always about having that importance. Now, with that, I actually be very specific. I like to have at least 5 to 10 investors to secure first within the same area.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because if, for example, you have, as I mentioned, a investor looking for a deal in a rent-to-SA, a rent-HMO, social housing, buy-to-let, you're now finding 4 or 5 different types of deals and trying to ping it to one investor. And you rely on that one investor to make it work. Whereas if you, for example, have 5 investors looking for a rent-to-service accommodation, and all you're focused on doing is finding rent-to-service accommodation deals, you now have that one deal to 5 investors, which now makes it a lot more smoother process. Now, there's different methods to find investors, right? And one thing that my mentor taught me is that look for people, not property. Anyone can be an investor, right? It could be your local shopkeeper. I've got deals from my local shopkeeper before. It could be people from your friendship group's parents. Literally anyone could be an investor, right? So first of all is by looking in your network and who actually needs property, you know, and just having a conversation with people.
Yes.
You know, what are you actually currently doing towards your goals, your investments, and seeing who can become a client. A second method I really recommend is Facebook groups. So many Facebook groups online where you can actually look at what people are posting, look at their criteria, friendly messages. Again, don't just lead with, I'm a deal sourcer, I want to source you deals, but like, okay, cool, I see you in a group chat, what is that you're actually into? Start with a conversation, because people don't like being sold to you. So it's about how can you actually have that conversation and they can become future investors. Platforms like LinkedIn, really, really good. And again, you can search by professions, right? Because when I started off, I was mainly sourcing to property investors, which is good, but I felt like they was having unrealistic expectations because they've been on a program and might have said, look, I want 100% ROI, for example.
And they may never have done a deal like that before,
Exactly.
but the expectations are quite high.
Exactly that. But what I saw, the sweet spot was professionals who might be making, I don't know, 300, 400K a year from their job. They haven't got the time or the knowledge to find property deals. And I'm positioning myself as the expert. And that goes back to what I said about being an expert. A lot of these bankers, they're earning these high salaries because they are very articulate and very meticulous in what they're doing. So if I now say to them, yeah, I source deals in Southampton, Nottingham, Birmingham, or whatever, they want to take me serious. But if I'm like, look, I'm the expert in central London for the last 4 years, I can find you the best property. They're going to have that confidence in me, right?
Yeah.
So going to these professionals and really understanding what they want and their criteria is important. Now, there's many different methods, but I just mentioned a few. And when you have that, it's all about having conversations. Now, I always like to have a conversation on a phone or through a Zoom call. It's all good on WhatsApp, but you can't really test their temperature. You can't test, are they just, you know, window shopping, or do they actually want to have a deal? So again, having a conversation, and you really want to understand why they're looking to invest, what they're looking for, have they invested before? If it's, for example, a purchase, are you purchasing your personal name or your company name? Really getting that due diligence on the investor. Because I feel like one of the biggest reasons why deals fall through is people don't know the investor well enough. So I really want to understand. And the question I had to ask them is, what does the perfect deal look like? If I was to bring you a deal today, what would make you take it?
Yes.
And alternatively, if I found you a deal that matches your criteria, what's one thing that might make you say no? Is it that there's no parking? Is it that it's next to near a prison? Like, what is it that could actually put you off, right? And really understand that criteria. And again, I recommend having about 5 to 10 serious investors, and I get to sign my terms and conditions. Now, I didn't mention this at the start, but as you know, property needs to have compliance.
Yes.
Now, if you're the one that's sourcing the deal with your investor, you need to have, you know, your redress scheme, ICO, you need to have business insurance, you need to have register a property ombudsman, and all the relevant insurances and business setup. Now, you can also do something called co-sourcing, where you can now also source for someone who is compliant, but we can go into that a little bit later. But what I recommend is to have your terms and conditions, which you send over to your investor, and you understand, and the terms basically says, look, we're going to find your property. If we do find your property, here is our fee. You can't cross out the deal, and there's all different terms in it, which I can actually provide people if they ask me, and I can send that over to them as well. Now, once you've got the criteria, it's about setting expectations with them. Because I think a lot of people, what they do now is they get the investor and they just leave them. But I actually...
So they have the initial conversation, what you're looking for, is okay, and then that's it.
And that's it. Yeah. But it's all about, I guess, setting expectations. I said to them, look, thank you so much for the conversation, and just to understand and relate it to them, you know, you're looking for a 3-bed property in Birmingham for rent to SA. Now, our complete transparency, we work with a lot of investors looking for your criteria. So this is exactly how we work. So we now had our induction call. We know your criteria. You sign the terms and conditions. You're not added to our system. And depending on how you want to send out the deals, but I can be like, okay, cool, look. So we're going to go out with our network and find you the best deals on the market. When we do find you a deal, however, there's you and many investors looking for that deal. So we normally want you to reply within at least 12 hours, whether you want to view the property, etc. Now, failure to do that could result in another investor taking the deal. And this is not to pressure you, but just to set your expectations. Then once you now view the property, we'll help you put the best offer possible, which aligns with your criteria. I'll go ahead, sign the terms, collect the sourcing fee, and help you with the whole process.
Yes.
Now, the reason that's so important is because when you now send out a deal, what a lot of investors will be like, that's all right, I'll take the next one, or I'll get back to you tomorrow, I'll get back to you next week. But I always like to have that conversation initially. And even when it comes to pitching the deal, I like to pitch the deal on the phone. So I'm not just going to send you a deal on WhatsApp and say, get back to me in 12 hours. Because again, they're going to now talk to their wife about it, their brother about it, and overthink it. But literally what I'll do is I'll pick up the phone. I'll be like, hi there, this is Denzel. Are you free for a quick 10-minute conversation? They'll be like, yes. I'll be like, look. And it's all about tonality, right? I'll be like, something like, let's say, I've got amazing news for you. Remember how you said you wanted this deal? Literally, I think I've got the perfect one for you. So you said you wanted something in Birmingham? Tick. You said you wanted it with this profit? Tick. And just kind of walk through the deal. And all the objections that they may have, I always like to have them written down. So they might say like, yes, but it's a buy to let, and I'm scared that this area will work for social housing. All right, look, not to worry. This area is also near, let's say it's Manchester United Stadium and a train station. So if you don't want to do it as social housing, we can actually do it as a service accommodation instead. So there's multiple exit strategies. So again, you're kind of pre-objecting what they will say is an issue, and you can actually come up with an adequate solution. And now don't lie about the solution, but this is what comes down to being an expert. Actually do your research and understand, look, one of my colleagues did a deal in this area and is currently profiting this every single month. And that really gives them an assurance that they will actually take on a deal and be very serious.
Yeah, I think the vetting of the investor, the buyer of the deal is so important.
Yeah.
And I love that process you take them through. I'm a big fan of that style of really understanding your customer first. It's like, you've got a customer walks into a restaurant and says, well, I'm hungry, I'd like something to eat. Anything, what would you like to eat? I'd not like some food.
Yeah.
And the more we can understand what our customer wants, the more likely they are to actually turn into a paying customer.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it'll just be conversation that don't go anywhere. And many people tend to struggle with that. They make a big mess at this step where they don't really understand what their customer wants, and they keep going back to them with stuff and say, I've offered them this and I've offered them that, and they're just not taking it because they haven't gone through it in the way that you were just sharing just now.
100%. I think to add to that as well is, one thing that I always say is that you want to treat every customer or client that all your future clients will come from that. So what are you going to do to go above and beyond for them? Because there's all these good methods which I mentioned, like Facebook groups and LinkedIn, but the best form of business is referrals. But if you can do an amazing job for someone, you can get so many referrals from them, right? And that's why it's also good to understand, is it their first deal?
Yeah.
Because if it's their first deal, you might need to do some more after support. Because again, I could provide you an amazing service accommodation deal, but if you don't have to set up Airbnb, Booking.com, how to take photos, it's not going to be profitable for you. So really understand them and what their goals are. Why are you actually into property? Like, why are you investing? Because again, some people are so adamant on a strategy. Denzel, I've got 50K, I need to invest into this. Okay, cool. But why do you actually want to invest into that strategy? How does that align with your future goals? Because sometimes, again, you're not giving financial advice.
Yes.
But you're just giving also expert advice as to, okay, cool, look, I personally think that this may be better suitable strategy for you based on your goals. Rather than just thinking, I want to make quick money from the sourcing fee. It's not about that. It's about really creating value to someone. And that's why people pay.
Yes. And so let's move on to the next step then. And I'm losing track what step we're on.
Step number 4.
Step number 4.
So step number 4 is finding deals. Now, again, I can break this down into purchase deals and rent-to-rent deals. But I think overall, as I mentioned earlier, the main thing is to look for people. Think what people are in positions where you may need to become of value to them, right? And let's say, for example, it's a rent-to-rent deal. It might be landlords who've had their property for a long time and have problem with tenants. Tenants aren't paying on time. They may be abroad landlords. So think, what are their pain points and how can you actually come up with a solution? Similar with selling deal. And again, with my first landlord, it was a purchase deal. Right? So with my first mentor, it was a purchase deal. And he had actually a potential client who was actually living in Spain.
Okay.
And they wanted to buy a new house in Spain, but they had to transact on it within about 60 days.
Right.
It was on the open market for about 6 months. I know I had an offer. And I remember I learned from him how he had a conversation and said, look, what's the most important thing to you right now? and she said buying this property in Spain. He was like, how much do you need for this property in Spain? And I think she said, don't quote me, I think it was like about £70,000. And he's like, look, if I could provide you £70,000 right now and the rest over a fixed period of time, would that be a good deal for you? She's like, yes, sign the contract. And that just taught me so much about the psychology of finding and looking for deals, because again, yes, Rightmove and Zebra, they all work, right? I've done loads of deals from them, but when you find actual people and you provide a good service for them, they're going to recommend you to so many people. Now, if you're looking for rent-to-rent deals, you have the normal platforms online, such as your Gumtrees, OpenRent, Zooplas. You also have the agents, which can be really, really good. But again, it's all about building relationships. Now, with agents, I think as well, it's about looking at the more boutique ones. Because a lot of the larger ones don't necessarily accept company lets, unless you have that individual
Big
relationship
chains,
with the big
national chains.
yeah, the big chains. But the boutique ones, and another thing where I know it's really about relationships, because I tested this one time. I had myself and someone was on my team. We called up the same agent around a 6-hour time difference, right?
Okay.
One at 9 a.m., me at 5 p.m. At 9 a.m., they called an agent and they said, no, we don't do company lets. But this was literally like, hi there, do you do company lets? They said no. I called them at 5 p.m. Oh, hi there, John, how's your day been? Oh, okay, cool, amazing. Okay, cool. I noticed you got property in this area. You know, how's it been? It's been on for 2 months. Like, why is that? Okay, cool. What's the condition? Okay, cool. And I really tried to understand the pain points. I was like, okay, cool. So what's really important for your landlord right now? And I was like, look, they just want a guaranteed rent, secure tenants, or whatever. I was like, look, I've got the perfect solution for you. We work with many landlords like this one around the area where we give them a guaranteed rent, etc., and done my whole pitch. Now, I actually sourced that deal and got that viewing, I think, the next day, just for my pitch. Whereas my other teammate who called them early in the day, that same agent said no.
Yeah.
So again, there's some agents who generally don't do it, but a lot of times it's your approach, because people are getting called 24/7 by these people. GD companies, GD rent to rent.
Yeah.
And all of these buzzwords sometimes put them off. But when you have a conversation with them, like I have like a list of so many agents who just send me off-market deals or rent-to-rent deals, all because of relationships.
Yeah.
And it's about how it can benefit them and if they can trust you to deliver a good service. On top of that, I think it's about being creative with finding your deals. As I mentioned before, not only have I sourced the deals for my shopkeeper, but my shopkeeper's cousin, I've actually bought a deal from as well. And again, that's all due to relationships, you know, having a discussion. I remember one time I was in a shop, Denzel, what is it that you do? Had a conversation, and I was selling a property. Because you literally never know who's selling a property, right? There's so many things that are going on where people actually need you to be that person that's going to help them get out of their current situation. And it's not for you to take advantage of them, but it's for you to actually find a solution that you can now package it into the deal and sell it on to your investor. So it's about being creative with your deals.
Yes. I was thinking we first started teaching rent to rent about 12 years ago. I was running some courses on rent to rent at that time. And the strategy was still fairly new because people were just coming out of traditional buy to let, no money down. Used to be the big thing many people doing. Some people started involved into HMOs, and rent to rent was just starting to find its path. We by no means created this concept. Lots of people were already doing it, but we were kind of doing it quite well. We started teaching it at the time. And what we would do, we'd ring the agent up and we'd talk about, look, you know, tell us about this property and do you think your landlord might be open for a guaranteed rent with no voids and no maintenance? And oh yeah, it could be. How's that going to work? But when you look at that today, and you ring an agent up, and if you say something like that to them, they say, "Oh, do you mean rent to rent?"
Yeah.
Because they've been educated, so things move on.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's so important how you approach it. Because there's many a time I've had conversation with people say, oh, you know, rent to rent doesn't work. Oh, I've been ringing the agents up. I've been trying to build a rapport and relationship. They're not interested, and there's no deals.
Yeah.
I said, well, if your view is there's no deals, then there are no deals for you.
Yeah.
But you've just highlighted it. The approach is so important.
Yeah.
How you approach them and to have that conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the biggest things with approach is also, I guess, where their benefit is for them, right? Because a lot of people just go into it with a benefit for themselves.
Yeah.
But with the agent, their main goal is to get commission.
Yeah.
The landlord is to get a rented property. So I'll give you another good example. And this is where it's also good, which I'll go into next about sales, handling objections, right? I had a landlord one time, they had listed their property, I think for £3,600. And we were trying to offer £3,300, right? Now, they wasn't trying to accept our £3,300 and they wanted to wait another month to have it on the market.
Right.
So I asked him again, like, okay, cool. So what's most important to you right now? You know, and again, it's about tonality. What's most important to you right now? You know, getting an extra £300 in rent per month, which might happen next month or the month after, or getting a secured rent and agreement signed today. They said agreement signed today. And again, long story short, I was able to secure that deal at £3,300 because I kind of showed them, look, you can maybe have it on the market for another month, another 2 months, but you're now going to miss out on another 3,600, another 3,600. Yes, I'm coming in a little bit lower, but we're still now going to give you a guaranteed rent for the next 3 years after any other void period.
Yes.
So again, understanding their pain points, whether it's investors or sellers, what are their pain points and how can you provide an adequate solution for them?
Yes. And then let's move on to step 5 then. What's step 5?
So step 5 is more so sales, negotiation and closing the deal. Now I think, especially as properties are becoming more competitive, people don't be proactive enough to find a deal, right? And sometimes your investors can let you down and sometimes your deals can let you down. And to tackle both aspects, let's say you have an investor. My thing is always, if I'm finding a deal for an investor, and this comes back to being a specialist, I like to have at least 3 to 4 deals in a pipeline, spare.
Yeah.
Because let's say, for example, naturally it gets rejected or someone else takes the deal, if it's on the market, I can now have a backup deal right ready for the right look. Not to worry, unfortunately we missed out on this deal, but I've got another one which is actually similar to it, which can actually be a deal that can go forward.
Yes.
And the other way around, right? If you, for example, have a really good deal and you've got a good relationship with a landlord, have a few investors ready, because I've had so many investors that have burnt my bridge. They said, Denzel, I want to take on a deal. I want to sign the contracts. They viewed it and they've ghosted me. But now you have good investors in the background. It's like, okay, cool. Look, not to worry. Look, instead we're going to use this company to take on the property. Really, really important. Also, sales and negotiation is more so about securing the best deal for your client.
Yes.
Right. I think when it comes to negotiation, it's really a technique, right? And I think a lot of people do things where they're just trying to be desperate, and people can tell from that, right? And at all levels, negotiation is important. Now, when it comes to my approach, let's say if we're talking about purchase deals, it's about what do they really, really want, right? A lot of times when people, let's say, list a property at £200,000, I know that they'll take it for about £190,000. So I'm not going to now start with necessarily £200,000. I might go with like a cheekier offer, but maybe have a bit more justification as to why I'm offering this. It might be like, for example, I'm offering £170,000, but it can be a quicker completion. Or if it's for rent to rent, I'm offering slightly lower, but we're going to now cover guaranteed rent, maintenance, all of these things. So really understand their pain points. But I think what people make a mistake is they try to use the same benefits for each landlord. And an example I'll give is, if you have like a young 25-year-old landlord who's got a property in central London and they live right next to it, the benefits of rent to rent might not appeal to them as much compared to someone who's 60-year-old living in Australia who hasn't got time to come to England. Yeah. So really understanding how you can do that, right? Now, also when it comes to sales, I think it's about understanding what's the end goal, right? How do you actually want this to work out for your investor? Because a lot of times as well, you can now promise your investor a deal and you're trying to squeeze the numbers to stack it. That's not sales to me. Yeah. To me, it's actually about getting a product, and I like to put contingencies in place. If, for example, I know the room's going to go for £700, I'll go for £650. If I know that it's going to be £150 nightly rate, I'll say £140. Okay. Because what's going to happen now is, if you can now make the deal stack in a worst case scenario, when you now package it and bring it to your investors, it's now going to make them be like, wow, you actually really good at your job. You said it's going to make me only £500 profit, but it's actually made me £600 profit. So I think when it comes to the skill of sale, and again, it's all about practice, right? One thing I always tell people is this: if you're very unconfident in your chosen area, spend a week practicing a random area. Yeah. Call agents in Newcastle where you're not going to do deals. Yeah. And when you're doing that, don't just quit for the sake of calling them, but write down every single objection. What's every single objection that they may face? Okay, cool. If it's a rent to rent, my property will get trashed. This will happen. And what's going to now happen is there's a method I use, which is called the feel, felt, found method. So, for example, Denzil, I don't really trust you with my rent to rent. It's going to get trashed. I will look, I completely understand why you feel that way. Many landlords that we work with have felt that the same thing. Now, what we've done instead is actually put a noise detector on the property. We've put a Ringo camera so we can make sure the property is in a good condition. And actually, for your benefit, we only make money when a property is in a lettable condition. So it's in our best interest to have the property in a good condition. And what we can do in addition is to send you updates every 2 to 3 weeks when our cleaners come in about the property, for example. So now what you've done is you've handled the objection and provided an adequate solution. You're not just shut it down and thought, now you're overthinking. You've actually said, no, it's possible what could actually happen, but these are the measures that we put in place to make it happen. So again, when it comes to sales and negotiation, it's about handling objections and coming up with adequate solutions. And this can save so many deals. Whether it's investors, again, you're not pitching them a deal. Look, if I'm honest with you, I don't think we can find another deal like this on the market. It's completely amazing. It's got this, it's got this, it's got this. You say you want to have your goal of retiring in the next 3 years. Look, we've got one now. 4 more of this can equal your retirement pot. Always, laying it back to what they want. I think another really important thing about negotiation and sales is understanding, are they emotional or more logical? Right? If they're more numbers person like a banker, look, it's an amazing area. It's currently yielding this amount. And in 10%, it increases an average by 10% every single 10 years or whatever. And that's why it's a really good investment for you. Or if it's more emotional, look, I understand that it's really important for you to, leave your job. And I feel like this is going to be the first step that we can take to help you leaving your job through property. So it's all about understanding. And that's why I think the first call is so important. Just let your client talk to you about what is their goals, what is their fears, and you can now help them overcome it when it comes to you pitching the deal, because that's what's going to be make or break. I think so many sources complain about deals falling through. I think it's because they haven't handled sales or the objections really, really well.
I think this is the most important skill that you need in this business, and it's a skill that's developed. Clearly, you understand it, and just simply using the things like the feel, felt, found method, things like that, where they can relate to somebody else that's done something similar. These things will really help. And even listening to the language that they're using, whether they're somebody that's emotional, they're thinking, oh, I feel this. If someone's saying I feel this, it means they're more of an emotional person. So the words that they're using can help us understand how they're thinking without them necessarily telling us as well. So it seems like you've done that skill really well. So
and it's practice, right?
Yes.
My first phone call, I was shaking.
Yes.
I didn't know what to do, and I think that's what people need to understand. It's really a numbers game.
Yes. It's also, everyone starts at the beginning.
I think it's people just see it as a cliche term, as a numbers game. But if you generally do something for long enough, it's literally impossible not to be good at it. That's my theory. 10,000 hours, constantly doing, and just learning from your mistakes. And I think that can help you along the way.
Yes, 100%. So let's move on to step 6, one before we get to the final step 7.
So step 6 is, I guess, systemizing and scaling your business. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for example, I started for some rent-to-rent deals, and right now I've got a whole team that does rent-to-rent deals. I don't remember the last time I looked at a rent-to-rent deal. Right, so it's all about systemizing and scaling. And now, before you hire, I think one very important thing is to document everything that you're doing, because a lot of times, as us founders, we think everyone should do my role exactly how I should do it. But people can only do the role as well as you document it and as well as you teach them. So I have really good standard procedures. Here's exactly step to step how to find deals. Here's my scripts. Here's my deal finding. Having everything in place as if I was teaching it to a baby. And then they can have some then initially your first few hires may be like stuff like admin. You might get, a virtual assistant to maybe package a deal for you, to reply to inquiries, to send out email lists, all of these things, right? I think a second way of systemizing it is by having like an automated email list, or now people use WhatsApp groups. And I think that's really important as well, because that can help you with sales. I'll give you a practical example. If you now have a goal of adding, let's say, 10 investors to your list every single week, right? By the end of the year, should I say, that's 520 investors on your email list, right? And now let's say they're all looking in a similar area. Let's just call it Birmingham. What you can now do is maybe send out 4 emails a month. Value, Birmingham is an amazing area. Here's the latest opportunities happening. Value, sales accommodations on the rise because of XYZ. And third, you can sell the deal. Look, there's 500 of you on this list, and we've got one deal available. First come, first served. And that was one of the biggest hacks that I learned, because now what's going to happen is they see that there's 500 people on the list, and they're all going to message me saying, ping, 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 ping. And let's say they lose out on the deal. I can be like, look, unfortunately, you lost out on the deal. Obviously, when the next one comes out next week, Wednesday, make sure that you're on time. And now you're kind of training your investors how to act, right? So that's like another thing. Email list or WhatsApp groups. Then as you're scaling more, you might want to get like someone who's going to be like a co-sourcer, right? Someone who can now be your person on the ground. So for example, when I was in university, I think my 3rd or 2nd year, I was getting really busy with sourcing. I think it was my 3rd year. And I was now sourcing deals in another area because I kind of had done Nottingham really well. And I kind of like differentiated it out. So I was paying people to do my VNs, or I was using the platforms like Viber to get people to do my VNs, right? Because I realized that, look, my time spending 3 hours traveling and coming back
doesn't make sense.
Where I can pay someone £20. Whereas it's about understanding how you can leverage your money to actually make more money and save you time, right? Also, when it comes to systems, it's about how you can actually create a deal flowing machine, right? I think you don't want to be the person that's just going out there having to find deals 24/7. And for example, what I started doing was, let's say it's landlords, I would now get, for example, a virtual assistant to message landlords every single day through some of the online platforms.
Yeah.
And again, I think what the difference between my approach and others is, some people message landlords with, "Hi there, I need to rent out your property ASAP and do a rent on it and search accommodation." No one's going to reply to it.
Yes.
But you've got to understand, what are they actually on the platform for, right? They're on Gumtree and Oprah to list their property. So my first thing is, how can I get a response for them? I don't even want to sell to them. How can I get a response for them? Then when I get a response from them, it's how can I get them on the phone? Then from a phone, how can I get a viewing and go ahead? So then it's creating that system where you can get people finding landlords for you, finding agents for you through automated methods, and maybe doing things like putting money into like leaflets or Facebook ads, which is also a way to get landlords ready. And that's where you're going to now get a deal flow machine. Deals will be flowing to you regularly. And also investors, similarly, you might be having like LinkedIn automation, Facebook automation, your VA and WhatsApp groups, really just getting investors on board and always having that goal in mind. I think I'm really someone that works with goals and results based.
Yes.
Everyone says, yes, I do 50 outreaches per day, but my thing is more goals orientated. My goal is to get 10 new investors, 10 new agents, 10 new landlords on board every single week, because it all compounds. It doesn't seem like it's a lot, but as I mentioned, at the end of the year, that's 520. And back to what I said about the long-term goal, it's the reason that I think it's good to have a system, and what I use is something like Notion, where every investor, every developer, every agent I spoke to is tracked, is because I can now always go back to them, right? I had this one developer, I remember, this is around 2023 or 2022. I first reached out to him in January. Denzel, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. It's not going to work. Time went on. I randomly checked them. I had a happy Easter. I had a happy Christmas, whatever. I think it was about a year later, they came back to me saying, Denzel, look, you've been very consistent with me. You remember this was my birthday. And that's, if we were my investors, I was remember that their birthdays.
Yeah.
I might remember one thing about their child, just to show that I care.
Rapport, yeah.
And they came back and gave me like a block of like 5 apartments, which I sourced on. And again, that's because I built that relationship.
Yeah.
They saw me on their list. Same with the investors, right? And you might have an investor today who's 20% warm, but then the more you nurture them, you provide value, 6 months down the line, they're going to now buy for you. So I think people need to understand that relationships isn't always an immediate impact. But how can you build that ecosystem where in the future, deals and investors will come? And that's when it comes to the system. And lastly, part of the system is your partnerships. Even as now...
Just before we get into partnerships, I'm just thinking about the way you nurture the relationship with your investors. Essentially, you're occupying mind space, meaning, if I say to you, think of a running shoe, what do you say?
Vomeros.
Yeah, so you've got a mind, you've got a thought in your mind of a brand that's been marketing to you.
Yeah.
And the same way, when you are constantly speaking to your investors, you're nurturing that relationship, they're thinking of you. So when they're ready, you're the forefront of their mind. Otherwise, you'll be at the back of the mind, you'll disappear unless you build that relationship.
And that's really, really good point. I think it's also about what they know you for, which is important as well. Because if I'm always selling to you now, you're going to see what Denzel just saying to me. But if I'm not coming with value, okay, cool, here's how this HMO property can actually help you leave your job. Or here's why Birmingham is on the rise. Or here's 3 things to look out for in the next 2025 when it comes to tax changes. They now see you as someone with value and as an expert. So when it now comes to you selling a deal, they're like, oh, hold on, this guy's been providing me value for the last 6 months.
Yes.
I'm now in a position to buy him a deal.
Yes.
And that kind of leads on to the point with partnerships, right? One of the best ways I now get deals, because whereas my whole sourcing business is now systemized, I don't really get involved in it at all. I've got someone that handles everything. I now focus on my other business called DJPS Lux, which is more so the high-end properties, right? So we focus on central London, 5 million plus assets. Now, one of the best ways to get my clients from that is my partnerships. Because really, you're not going to necessarily find a billionaire on the road, right? So I'll think, okay, cool. Where are they? Private members clubs. They've got brokers. They've got family offices. They might be football agents if they're a footballer. And it's about how can I now build that relationship with these partners where I'm referring them business and they're referring me business. So even on the way here, someone gave me a call saying, Denzel, I've got someone in Dubai looking to buy in London. That's only because I've got them as someone of value, where I've recommended them business before and they're referring me business back. So another part of systemizing is actually really building out your network of people who are going to be constantly finding new deals, constantly finding investors and building relationships around that. And that's how you systemize it. Now, the scaling part is about how you can actually go from doing one type of strategy to others. So as I mentioned, you might focus on Birmingham rent to social accommodation, then Birmingham rent to HMOs and social housing, then you've owned the whole of Birmingham rent to rents. Then you might think, cool, do you know what, I've got a team sorting that out, let me do now Birmingham buy to lets and Birmingham HMOs. And a really creative way where you can make more money through property is by doing 1 or 2 strategies within one deal. I'm going to give you a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're doing a BRR. So you find a property for a client, and let's say you charge them £5,000.
Yeah.
Now, they, let's say, maybe want you to project manage the refurb, right? And you can now charge an extra £2,000 for that. That's now £7,000 made. And now let's say they don't want to rent it out to a single family. They want to rent it out to a social housing company.
Mm-hmm.
You can now package that to a social housing company and charge them £3,000.
Yeah.
So you've now made £10,000 from that one deal, and you've helped 3 different people from that one deal.
Yeah.
So again, it's all about how you can now systemize and scale your business to do more deals. So yeah, that's the 6th step.
Yes. 7th.
Oh, 7th step.
7th. Partnership was 7th, right?
No, so partnership was a part of the 6th step.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's one more.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
okay.
yeah.
Let's do 7 then.
So 7th step, and this should, there's debates where this should come in the sequence. Some people say first, some people say 7th. That's why I left it till last. That's more so your networking and building your personal brand. So again, this can be the 1st step or the 7th step. And I think this is really about, as I mentioned, knowing who you want to surround yourself with and building your network. Now, one thing that's helped me a lot is my personal brand on social media, documenting my journey. Because the more you document, the more people that can relate to you.
Yeah.
Because I think it's true. Like, if I was someone who just was working a banking job and had 500k saved, and someone just pinging me on Facebook saying, I want to sell you a deal, I wouldn't really trust you. But one thing I've learned from one of my investors is that, Denzil, when you first reached out to me, I checked you on LinkedIn, I checked you on Facebook, I checked you on Instagram. So the more you have a personal brand, because people buy from people, the more they'll actually trust you.
Yeah.
Now, people think you need to have an amazing camera. No, you just need to document your journey, right? I'll give you a really example. There's a guy called Joshua that I know that he was actually one of my mentees before. And he posted a TikTok about, doing deals and leads. And from that one TikTok, bear in mind, I don't think he's even got over 1,000 followers. He got 2 investors from that one TikTok.
Wow.
Because again, it's all about positioning, right?
Yes.
If I'm just doing a generic TikTok about sourcing, you might not get as many leads. But if I'm like, guys, I'm the go-to sourcer for deals in leads. And here's why you should invest in leads. And here's how I sourced a rent SA for my client in leads.
Yeah.
Just through the power of the internet, someone might see that. And again, that's part of the deal flow system where investors and deals will come to you just from posting your content. Content compounds, right? And building a personal brand. So you now can go to an event. So if you came to the event and those people spoke to you, I recognize you straight away, like, oh yeah, you're the person that I listened to most of my journey. And it's all about having that face of someone of value. And it's about what you're known for, right? So really building your brand is so important. And networking is kind of self-explanatory, which is kind of what I said before about partnerships, about really building a network of people. Now, a really big hack that I give is that when I first started off as well, again, I started going to loads of property events, which were really good. I love property events. But I thought, look, I'm going to a property event, I'm just seeing 100 other sources. So I went to because my uncle's a dentist, I went to an event for dentists, right? And it was such a big hack because when I went to that event, I was the only property person and I was the only young person. So I spoke to one person and I think this was the only event saying that, I'm into property and I'm helping dentists. Again, back to your niche, I'm helping dentists invest into property. He was like, really? At this age? And he told so many people. I remember I had a whole queue of people looking to talk to me just from that. So again, about being more creative with your networking. Don't just go to where everyone's going to. What environments and rooms can you put yourself in where you can actually help people? And that's why, I know people who've built big sourcing companies. So there's one lady who specializes in helping Hong Kong professionals. And there are people that specialize in footballers, and there are people that specialize in dentists and whatever. But really have that niche, tap into it, and then gradually expand. And you can even make your content about that, right? Even on the topic of football, I know 2 really good football sources who they only source for footballers, and they've got all their TikTok and Instagram about sourcing for footballers. And again, you might specialize by area, by industry, or wherever it is. But the more you're a specialist, the more people will come to you because you are that specialist for that person.
Yes. There's some amazing tips there that you've shared with us as well, and unraveling the framework like that. There's so much of that I resonate with, and I love the processes you go through, and much of that we talk about as well, and we do because it's the framework that leads to the results. And doing the things, and rather than skipping things, it's kind of doing these things in order. You're doing it consistently, you're pretty much guaranteed to make it work.
100%. It's all about frameworks, right? And I think one thing I've learned as well upon my journey is that when you want to treat it like a side hustle, it will become a side hustle. But think of it like a business. Okay, cool. What operations, what procedures do I need to have in place to actually make it work? Like every business that I'm in now, I'm really trying to build it as a business. And okay, cool. What is actually my end goal for the business, right? And that can kind of be like another point. when you're doing sourcing, think, what is your goal from sourcing? Are you trying to source just to replace your income? If that's the case, that's fine. Are you trying to source to now saving into rents? Are you trying to now source to be able to, get your own buy-to-lets and developments? But really work with your end goal and then work backwards. Okay, cool. If that's my end goal, what do I need to be doing today? And the way I break down my goals is, look, okay, cool, this is my 5-year plan. That's my vision. It's there. I know what it is. Cool. Not that I've forgotten about it, but I parked that away. That's my destination. Now, what is my 1-year goal? Okay, cool. Now break down my 1-year goal into my quarterly goals. Then my quarterly goals into my monthly goals. Then my weekly goals. And now a day. What I have to do every single day. If I can complete this every single day, I'll achieve my weekly goals, then my monthly goals, then my quarterly, then my yearly, and then my 5 years goal. This is all a framework that you've got to put in place. And I think another important thing I thought to mention about hiring is when you now have that team, really instill that culture within them. Help them actually achieve your goals. So for example, when people work on my sourcing team, it's like, I don't see it as building my business. You're building your business within my business. So now you can use my platform, you can use my name, my branding, but you just got to do your part. I do my part, and we work together. Don't just, because that's something I think, especially us Gen Zs, we as leaders, we got to really understand how to actually employ the right person that can do your job better than you or to the same level as you. How can you actually keep them motivated where they can actually achieve their goals and see their long-term vision within their company? That will really help us as well, because your team says everything about you, right? You don't want to now build an amazing name for yourself and a reputation and someone ruins it on the phone. Because reputation is so key in property.
It takes a long time to build, and you can destroy it in minutes.
100%.
Denzel, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and it's not only was it very knowledgeable but inspiring as well, because this is, as we said earlier, it's the core skill that you need to master. It doesn't matter what strategy you choose to do. What underlines success in property is your ability to be able to find, negotiate, secure, appraise deals. These are the key things.
100%, yeah.
So Denzel, if somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so my Instagram is _Denzil Jones. I've got a YouTube channel as well called Denzil Jones, and _Denzil Jones on all platforms. I think the last thing I want to leave everyone with is, always think long term in terms of your goals, but act with short bursts of intensity. And what I mean by that is, you want to be able to delay gratification, then that things will happen over time. But at the same time, you don't want to move too sluggish where you're not having enough momentum to actually make things happen. And I guess some good books I recommend on that is one called Atomic Habits, right? And that really teaches you about becoming the person who actually deserves that success, right? So really, I guess if you can embody that, and another book called Outliers, which teaches you, you got to do 10,000 hours to become an expert. And when you now have that mentality of, look, I'm not in this for 1 month or 2 months, I need to do 10,000 hours. I literally think it's impossible not to succeed if you're doing something for 10 hours. So just really instill that into your brain. Surround yourself with people who are doing that, who are experts. Learn from the best people like yourself who are doing really well, and implement that into your life every single day. And always track the data. I'm big on data. Okay, cool. This deal didn't go well. Why didn't it go well? What part of the deal didn't go well? This investor said no. At what part of the conversation were they irritated? Why did the landlord walk away? Like, always really track it and understand how you can now replenish your script, replenish what you're doing to actually see progress long term.
Denzel, thanks so much. We're going to link those handles in the description as well, so people can access those to YouTube channel and to Instagram and any other ones. Very helpful for you as well. Thank you so much. Thanks for myself. Thank you.